We're very much in the rearview mirror now of Gamescom and Opening Night Live, where Resident Evil Requiem had a story trailer and an on-floor demo, and obviously footage from that is now all over the internet via various influencers and media outlets. But on top of that, across the last week, media outlets had interviews with the team behind the game, and there was lots of really interesting pieces of information, some pretty major stuff, and some stuff that maybe we could theorize as well. So I've gathered all that up here in this solo news video. Hello survivors, I'm Sai for First Aid Spray, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you're not already. Go check just in case, in fact, because we're going to be continuing our coverage of Resident Evil Requiem, as well as just generally the past, present and future of Resident Evil. But let's get into the most important, the biggest one, the rumour and theory killer. That is not Lisa Trevor. Immediately, in the original launch reveal trailer of Resident Evil Requiem, there was a lot of speculation about the monster sort of seen at the very end and heard at the very end being Lisa Trevor, just largely because of the kind of shaking of chains. And as of the demo footage, that theory really caught fire in the last week because of the shaking of chains, and also now the fact that the face has like a bug-eyed kind of look to it, which doesn't necessarily not look like Lisa's unmasked model if you were to take the mask off of the remake model. But most importantly, the sound effects that we're making were very much just the sound effects that Lisa makes in remake. Koshi Nakanishi, the director of the game, and Masato Kamazawa, the producer of the game, have done various interviews, as I say, across the week following Gamescom. And they touched on this multiple times. Speaking to IGN first, they asked about various theories around the game, and specifically Lisa Trevor. Nakanishi said, "We're very much aware of the discussion and speculation around this kind of thing, and as a player, whenever I'm playing a game, I love to get involved in that stuff, and I don't think it's fair for me to weigh in on those debates as a developer." But then Kumazawa weighed in, sort of interjected on this one to say that one comment I will say is that you mentioned about the scream being part of the speculation. The sound in the demo is not final, it's actually temporary audio, so I wouldn't focus too much on what you can hear in the demo right now. When the final game comes out, it'll become clearer. That isn't necessarily outright deconfirmation. They didn't say the words, "That's not Lisa Trevor," so the internet of course would still theorize on that, I'm sure. So to that end, I think they made it a lot clearer via the Japanese outlet Dem Famiko Gamer, which was translated on Twitter by the user Genki. And also you can go on the article online and translate it however you see fit, like I use Google Translate, and they do specifically say that isn't Lisa, and that media outlets, this is very funny, can run with that as a headline. No, that's not Lisa Trevor. So there we go. We know for certain that the tall monster chasing Grace around Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Centre is not Lisa Trevor. Now, the speculation on whether or not it's Alyssa or whatever else can certainly continue, but we know for certain then that is not a jumping off point from remake. The other big conversation around Resident Evil Requiem is the presence of legacy characters and the speculation about legacy characters. There's no real evidence that anyone is in the game, but for some reason around Requiem in particular, that conversation really seems to have taken hold. Everybody wants to see their particular favourite character in the next Resident Evil game, and it's, I guess Capcom have been forced to respond a couple times. We had Nakanishi saying that Leon isn't, not that Leon isn't in the game, but he was considered for the game, but was decided against early on because he wouldn't fit in with the horror tone that they were going for, being a bit of an action hero. And speaking to Games Radar this week, they also said, they were very coy about things, but apparently said, "Rest assured, I'm sure Chris is out in action somewhere in the world, but for now, we're not really looking at him." Which is an interesting thing, to mention Chris and not Leon. The conversation certainly is around Leon and Jill specifically. Perhaps that's because of their history with the Return to Raccoon City and how that all connects, and also they're just the two most popular characters in the series, but it is interesting here that they mentioned Chris. And of course this does lead on to the end of Village and what happens from there, and the setup for the future of Chris's story, which we are apparently not going to cover in Requiem, which isn't really surprising. I think if you see what we've already seen, it doesn't really match up, but it'll be interesting to see if we get any hints and notes about what became of that storyline, or if we're going to revisit that. Speaking to Game Informer, they asked Nakanishi, can you talk about the persistent theme of family across this trilogy, referring to Resident Evil 7, Village, and of course Resident Evil Requiem? And importantly, Nakanishi said, we don't really think of 7, Village and Requiem as a trilogy. 7 and 8 are a duology. Ethan's story concludes at the end of Village. Requiem is the 9th mainline title, but it's moving back to the series mainstream, as it were, to push the storyline forward. In that sense, I don't think family is the main theme of Requiem. It's part of it, but not as emphasized as the past 2 mainline titles. Part of Grace's motivation is things like finding out what happened to her mother, but that isn't the complete theme of the game. So we do absolutely have confirmation that despite in the past, Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 feeling like a Raccoon City trilogy, and 4, 5, and 6 feeling like the action trilogy, 7, 8, and 9 don't make up a trilogy. 7 and 8 are connected, and 9, again, you can make this assumption from what we've seen so far, but we have absolute confirmation here that 9 is not a sequel to Resident Evil Village from a storyline perspective. Of course, it's the game that follows it, numbered, but does it really? Because, RE9, sure, it showed up on the announcement, but its name is Resident Evil Requiem. The other major thing to cover here is scariness versus action, sort of looping back around to what I was talking about before. And obviously lots of conversation around that. It is a big part of the marketing, as it should be, that Resident Evil Requiem will provide players with 2 possible perspectives to pick from, and there's been a lot of emphasis on what makes those perspectives feel different. And obviously, if your first-person perspective, it is a scarier game in a third person, less so, and that's seemingly deliberate. Nakanishi told Games Radar that looking back at Resident Evil 7's first person perspective, I implemented that as a way to make it more immersive and more scary than ever before, which I think most media and players agreed it was an incredibly scary game, possibly too scary. I think some people couldn't handle it, and either you couldn't finish or didn't even start it, and that's something I look back on thinking that, I want to make sure people can enjoy this game. So if you started off in first person perspective and you're finding it's too much, then third person is almost a way to step slightly back from that level of horror and make it slightly easier to deal with by having the character on screen as a kind of avatar of yourself, which is very interesting and also very bold to say, I suppose. It's almost like calling players out. You should probably play in first person, but if you're a wimp, go to third person. But I'm sure it's not necessarily that case. And of course, the perspectives, both of them being available, is good for accessibility and just good for comfort. We ran a poll on the First Data Break Discord server recently asking people what perspective they're going to play the game in, and it was overwhelmingly third person. That's not my personal preference. I'm going to play as the game recommends, which is seemingly first person. And I really love 7 and Village for what they did with that, and I really would like to play another game like that. So I'm going to play first person, but the choice is great. Of course, there were some concerns about Requiem and the balance of horror and action, which is certainly something that it needs to get right in order to be a massive success. There will be fans who enjoy it if it's more of an action game, fans who enjoy it if it's more of a horror game. But if we can tick all those boxes, I'm sure that's what Capcom is trying to do. And some concerns about what we have seen so far about the lack of combat. I do think that Capcom are keeping that closer to their chest. It's certainly there, but this is just a portion of the experience they're showing so far. And it does seem to be the case that has been iterated here by Nakanishi and Kumazawa, who said that Grace will get weapons in her hands. She won't be defensive throughout the entire game, and I think that it's a satisfying growth journey that you go on with her, where she's not going to be terrified right through to the end of the game. And IGN asks, so Grace herself will be able to fire guns later in the game? And Kumazawa said, yes, as you mentioned, the series is known for this kind of tension and release catharsis curve. We can't sustain maximum anxiety throughout, or it's tiring, but we also want to keep you on your toes, so you have this roller coaster dynamic tension throughout. And we're going through that again, but we want to make the wavelength of that curve be the biggest it's ever been, where you have huge tension spikes and then we give you a great release of tension as well. So yes, they are really trying to make, even though maybe they said RE7 was too scary, they are really trying to make sure this is a scary game, but also you get a break from that scariness. So that should hopefully put some people's fears to rest, that Grace is going to wield more than just a handgun. And to add on to that, Den Famiko Gamer asked them what kind of weapons will appear in the main story, and Nakanishi said, I can't say anything specific, but there are some things that will be appearing for the first time. they were asked, could you at least tell me the size? Nakanishi said, I was surprised to hear about the size. It's quite something. So there is new weapons coming to Resident Evil for the first time, and apparently they are oversized weapons. Now, the finger was quite an oversized weapon. I wonder if we're going that big or even bigger. It's going to be really interesting to see how the mood changes when you're going from being chased from this not Lisa Trevor monster, completely kind of defenseless, to being able to wield potentially massive weapons, and how they're going to balance that. There's all kinds of other morsels and tidbits out there if you dig for it, but these are the things that really caught my eye that I wanted to cover together in this video. So hopefully you've learned something interesting about what's going on over at Resident Evil Requiem, but certainly the TLDR is that Lisa Trevor is not the monster, Chris Redfield is not in the game, and we are definitely kind of trying to get that balance of horror and action with some oversized, potentially, weapons. Let us know how you're feeling about Resident Evil Requiem down in the comments below. And as I say, keep your eyes over here on First Aid Spray. We'll be continuing to cover all the news as it comes out about all 3 of the current ongoing Resident Evil projects with Requiem Survival Unit and the upcoming motion picture, as well as we cover classic games and everything else that we do on the channel. Thanks for watching. I've been Sai, and have a good week.